Hello and welcome to the I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography program at the School of Visual Arts. We are thrilled to have photographer Chris Verene with us tonight as a guest speaker. Originally from the small community of Galesburg, Illinois, Chris has spent the past 3 decades creating a remarkable photographic document of his family and his community. He's currently based in New York, where he is an assistant professor of photography at the College of Staten Island. He is represented by Postmasters Gallery. Chris has 3 monographs to his credit: Chris Verene, Twin Palms 2000, Camera Club, Reflex Modern Art 2000, Family, Twin Palms Press 2010. His photographs are in the permanent collections of the Metropolitan Museum, the Whitney Museum, the Jewish Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and the Walker Art Center, among many other world-class institutions. Chris has been a colleague of mine for several years. We've had a chance to exhibit together a couple times. He is one of the most singular voices in photography, in my opinion, and I am really thrilled to welcome him to the lecture series tonight.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks so much, y'all. I'm glad to be here. And I have prepared some interesting stuff. I think, let's see, well, I'm going to bring up this picture and go to the full screen. So here we are. This is Galesburg, Illinois. This is a project that I started when I was in high school, documenting the community there, my family there, in a small town in central western Illinois. And when I talk about my work, I'm really basically telling you about my life and what I've been doing all this time. So it's very personal, and it's really something that I guess it's part of my artwork to talk about the artwork. And in the beginning, when I make it, to go and talk to all the people who are in the work and go and be kind of a representative of the work itself. So I consider it part of my practice to meet you all and to discuss the work with you all. And it's part of my practice to talk to all the people who appear in the work and be with them as well. So we're going to look at it all from that perspective. So in the town of Galesburg, there's very few hills. This is one of the only ones. It's a big flat farmland there. And this is in the late 1980s. This is my family. I'm an only child of a small family, and this is my Aunt Louise, my mom, my grandfather and father, and my grandmother. I'm mostly close to this side of the family. When I grew up as an only child, my cousins were kind of like siblings to me, so you'll meet them. And this is when I first started working in color. A lot of the early work's in black and white, but I wanted to document what I knew, because I think even at an early age, even in high school, I had this idea that if I was going to use this power of photography, that I really only felt like it belonged to me to photograph what I already knew. I didn't really go exploring with the camera at first. It was kind of like the stuff that was most close to me, my bedroom, my family. This is my place at the table here. And I pulled away the chair so that I could get a better shot. And this was supposed to be a Christmas gift for them. And I was going to crop it like this. And this was the whole plan, because I'd been documenting the family and doing all this stuff in black and white, and I think I thought I was going to be a kind of like a street photographer or something, except the street was just rural Illinois. But so I was doing all this stuff with medium format and black and white and lights, and then I thought, well, if I'm going to make presents, everyone wants color, so I got to learn how to do color. And so this was originally made to be a gift, and I wasn't going to crop. I was going to crop out the lights and everything, and I was going to crop away the feet and all. And then when I got the images back, I realized that there was something else going on, and that it was somehow a more compelling picture. And I began to realize that maybe this was pointing towards really looking at the whole thing and the whole family and the house and everything. And so this was kind of the beginning of the work in a way. And this is when I lived in Atlanta, Georgia. We moved all around. We lived in central Pennsylvania. We lived in DeKalb, Illinois, further north, and Galesburg. And but when I was 12, we moved to Atlanta. And so at that time, it was kind of like I lived in the big city, but I would spend all my time with my family back in this small town. So I kind of had one foot in both places. And this is also Galesburg. And this is the Christmas Lights Contest winner house. There's a contest every year, and you can see it here from distance. And that's so much of what the land looks like. And I also, I think early on I really wanted to be a landscape photographer. I still wish that I was, but I'm not really. I make a lot of them, but you know, maybe one every 10 years kind of sticks. But this is what it's like there. And a lot of what's happened with the work, probably in the 10 years ago or so, was I started to look at things over time. So looking at this room and then going back to the room, you know, 15 years later in the same room and how it had changed. And you'll see kind of in some of it, I began to realize that the power of the work was that I was living so long and continuing to photograph so long that it had this meaning that you couldn't plan. This is when they had to move the bed to the dining room because they couldn't climb the stairs anymore. So, and here's my grandparents' bed in the room. Now, I knew early on that my grandmother was kind of the center of the work, and this is my grandmother on the right and her sister Doris. They were both school teachers, one-room school teachers out on the prairie, really before before there was any kind of urbanization in the area. And I grew up listening to my grandmother's stories about what it was like, and I really latched onto that, and I felt like that was how I understood people and humanity and stuff. And I would listen to her talk about her school children that she taught and listen to kind of her version of the world as told through every story that happened in the community. And she taught one-room schoolhouse. You guys know what that is? One room, I see some nodding. So where you guys would be like the first graders, and then y'all are like maybe the second grade, and then the third graders are in the back, and fourth, and then in the way back you guys are probably sixth graders, and you're the oldest ones, so you're in charge of helping me with the fire and keeping the building warm, and you guys are in charge of horses and stuff that's beyond what I can do because I'm looking after the little ones who can't really be left alone. And so you would teach school that way. And so I really heard kind of all about life through this process. And really I fixated on that, I think, growing up. And Galesburg is also a railroad town. There's intersection of two railroad lines there. So this was a big reality to me that there would be this sort of community, this rolling community of people and trains, and the idea of hobos who would ride the trains, and then they might get off and they might come to the door and knock and ask for food. And I was fascinated with this and wanted to be that. And the poet Carl Sandburg was also from this town of Galesburg, and he later sort of tried to live as a hobo so he could learn what that was like. And so a lot of my life was spent in this yard and being around that kind of mentality. And this is years later. This is Eleanor at the salon. It's the kind of town where you would get your hair done at somebody's house, you know. And my cousin Candy later went to cosmetology school. That was a big thing. Carl Sandburg College there's a cosmetology school and so on. So that's a big part of the community there. And this is Mabe and Marion, who are not proper aunts, but they're like aunts. I grew up with them kind of that way, and this is them coming through the door. And they lived together they're pretty much, I think, their whole life. They were friends, and I'm distantly related to one, and then they're best friends, but they're like family. This is Mabe and Marion's front porch. And another landscape that I succeeded in. And this, just to bring out detail, because I don't know if you can see them all, but this is the porch, and I remember laying on this carpet as a kid all the time, always the rough carpet, and being there and sort of picturing everything kind of from that perspective. And so when I started to realize the power of photography in the late 80s and the early 90s, I went back and looked for the same things that I remembered. And of course, no one had changed anything anywhere in Galesburg, so it was all still there. and very familiar. And the little angels are taped with some sort of medical tape to hold them together and keep the same decorations for 50 years, you know, and it keep going. Here's my cousin Steve and his daughter. In the early 90s, I took photography classes, and I started to think about using photography as kind of a therapeutic tool. This was during a serious divorce that was going on in the family, and Steve, and to this day, has been very open about me photographing and documenting. And so when there was stressful things, I would keep taking pictures. As my family's pretty Swedish and pretty stoic and doesn't talk about anything really, so I would keep taking pictures as kind of a way of working through stuff. And then the years go by, and this is Steve and his mom Doris, my grandmother's aunt again, and here they're in the same McDonald's but years later. And here's Steve and Doris again, another whole bunch of set of years later, with Steve wrapping the Christmas presents and Doris in the background. Aunt Doris took a job staying nights with a shut-in. You guys know what shut-ins are? The shut-ins, people who are not really well enough to ever leave the house, but they're not really need to go to a hospital either. So, but somebody comes and stays the night usually because they wouldn't have anyone to help them if something happened in the night. So Doris took that job, and I remember going and visiting her and staying part of the night and keeping her company with the shut-in asleep, and that's how I took this picture. This is Steve's laundry. This is another part of the divorce project. If you look at my books, you'll see the sort of the whole, things are broken into chapters. So tonight there's not enough time to tell you the entire cycle of how things happen, but the stories go, and this is his daughter's swing set when they're all grown up, but it's still there, and now it's his laundry center. Now here we're jumping back. This is the early work. This is probably 1987. My cousins Candy and Heidi, who are like my siblings, up in their bedroom. And this is early on when I had gotten Flash and I was trying to figure out how to work with it. And all my family was very willing to do whatever with me, because encouraged me. And I probably don't take unflattering pictures like this anymore. But at the time, it seemed like this was just a great picture, you know. And when we get through with this, we'll look at some video. That's the new work where they'll talk to you about it. And here's Heidi then many, many years later. This is Heidi in 2006. And this is the Renaissance Fair costume. Heidi works at Walmart and has a long story to tell that maybe you'll hear one day about Walmart preventing the employees from going to the Renaissance Fair and blocking out all the dates so that no one could take off any vacation dates at any nearby Walmart when the Ren Fair was on. So my wife and I did this picture with her as a kind of celebratory thing so that she could get her outfit out in public and get to wear it anyway. And this is Candy's wedding. Then this is in probably 92, 93. And this is at the Veteran of Foreign Wars Hall. And that's why they have their big frame flag. And Woody and Al in the background are her customers from her job at the Sirloin Stockade, which is like a all-you-can-eat restaurant. And they were her regular customers every day with the senior dinner, you know, like the 3 p.m. dinner. And they would come, and this later became the cover of the book and was in a lot of museums. And they told me when they were still alive that if they had known that this picture would be so famous, they would have worn their dress cowboy gear, that this isn't the dress gear. That there's actually a fancier level that they could have broken out, which I never did get to see, but apparently it was all white, but then you wouldn't wear white to the wedding, but then if they'd known, they would have worn it anyway, so. And then we see Candy many years later. Candy and Craig lost their jobs when the factories moved to Mexico. Katie, Cody, and Candy in the front yard. Candy's house. Candy wanted me to call my latest book Candy's Divorce. This was the same day they had signed divorce papers, and the house had become Candy's house and then was hit by a tornado. And actually no one was hurt, And if you read the introduction in my book, it explains all this, but no one was hurt, luckily. And Cody pulled his sister out of the room just as the tree was coming through the roof. And I happened to be nearby and raced over there. And so it becomes part of the story. Craig's new house. They get divorced, and that's Craig's new house. And Candy's new boyfriend. And this is jumping much, much further into the future. These are Candy's 4 kids when they lived in the campsite. And she'll talk a little bit about that in the video too. My son is the same age as Maddie and Brianna, and they all are in the work too and play together and are now there. That generation is growing up together. This is my cousin Libby's farm. Libby was a pig farmer, but a very small-time pig farmer in an area of mostly serious factory farms. It's very, very hard to compete. But she was running an old-fashioned farm. I often ask people to count how many cats are in the picture. It is not 3. There's 4 main cats. There are other cats. And since you guys, it's digital learning and everything, these are all scans of film negatives, right? So, and then you go into the software and you have a print, like a darkroom print, and then you bring up the scan and then you work with the darkroom print and you try to find the values in it so that there's no making up a new Photoshop value is not allowed. So I try to estimate what it really could have been and work with them that way. But there are other cats, but I was never really able to bring them out without cheating. There is data there, and the scans of those negatives are just astounding. It looks better than most of the raw files that I see. This is Libby, and this is, I think, this is when I visited that time, there were 2 sows pigging at the same time, and she's really, her husband's blind, and he helps a lot, but she's running from 2 different sows on either side of the farrowing barn, going back and forth and doing the old-fashioned farming. And this is Libby and Bill. And this is right when the economic downturn started to hit in Galesburg, which it's hit twice. It hit early. Y'all have heard about the 2008, but it really hit earlier than that in 2004. And what Libby would tell you, the farm foreclosed, of course. But what happened with them and what happened with a lot of people is they moved in together. There was a lot of consolidation in the town. So if people had a basement or something, you'd occupy the basement, you know. And I found a lot of people I knew, not family, but other families in town would, you know, suddenly there was a whole other set of people who lived with them, and then they split the costs, and that happened a lot. So they moved in with my great uncle Richard, and this is him in her house. And this Libby would tell you that she's doing canning here, and it's the first time in her life she ever read the directions for anything. But she decided to go into canning and selling them at the church, and she has vegetable plots in town where people have given her land because she kind of can't stop farming. So there's just major vegetable growing all the time, and that's Libby and Bill. And this is Rosie. I told you we can't tell all the stories, but the Galesburg used to have a very large public mental hospital, which was not too bad as public mental hospitals go in the U.S. It was very large, and it was one of the big employers in the city. And Rosie lived in that hospital, and so did a few other people that we know in town. And my parents both worked at that hospital as orderlies because anybody could get a job there. And it was an indigent hospital, so this means, as you know, that this would be a place you could go if you had no health insurance, but you were seriously mentally ill, and you could live there and you could get care there. And during the Reagan administration, the United States changed the definition of what it was to essentially need this care. And so they rewrote the whole way that medicine was understood in mental health care. And in doing that, they were able to create this surplus of money by not needing it anymore because everyone was put out. So people like Rosie weren't at the hospital anymore because they were released. And this happened nationwide. And I still don't know that there's a proper documentary that explains it all. But people like Rosie ended up living on some type of a small public aid check or something, and in a small economy like Galesburg, you could get by. And she believed, she's schizophrenic, but she believed that the check was payment for something, so she would appoint herself jobs to do in order so that the check would keep coming. And so she would take her cart around and bring food and medicine, again, to shut-ins, people who were worse off, people who needed the Salvation Army. She had, this is Betsy the bike that she would take around. She's been in the work for many, many years, and has, the New York Times Magazine did an interview with her and a story about my pictures with her and so on. And this is Rosie late in her life. And she began to write messages in a lot of places. This is actually in the foyer in her apartment. This is around '08. Good luck, human God, Galesburg, Illinois, martial law, devils, sons and daughters born of evil devil. Prove to me your Jesus can walk on water. Only then I will believe in him and bow down to him on bended knees. No tricks allowed. Rosie was often warning of things that were coming that the government would do. She spoke about it a lot, pretty much as she got older and almost obsessively. She's no longer living. Dorothy and Rosie lived, both of them together in the hospital, and there was a nursing home in town that one part of the home took everybody who they really weren't able to send out of the hospital system, people who had become so used to the system that it would really harm them to be out. And Dorothy was one of these people, but she was much better off than a lot of the other people in the home. And we had a relative who was in the nursing home, and so became, and Dorothy's mom was there, and we used to go all the time and all the time. And we had many years of photographing Dorothy and sharing photos with her, and it was a very therapeutic and kind of positive thing. This is Dorothy and my mom and the dog going there, and that's Cottonwood Home in the background. This is Dawn, who also lived in the Research. It was called The Research. Dawn is collecting aluminum cans on Main Street. And he later lived in the Salvation Army men's home. This is Gary. Gary was only, I think, really only in the Research for outpatient care, and he and I are still close friends. And my Aunt Doris was his babysitter when he was little. And this is Gary in front of his house. And this is Max. Max is a bachelor. Our friend Max was close with my grandfather. Max is Sabbath. Max lived most of his life alone in this house, and he and my grandfather both worked with the scrap metal for the railroad. And this is Max's junkyard, which he later became the purveyor of the whole junkyard. My grandpa liked to go out there a lot, and they would climb through the scrap. And of course, then it was railroad scrap, and there's not so much now. It's mostly cars. Max escaped from 2 concentration camps, or labor camps, as he called them. And he picked Galesburg on the map when he knew he was getting out, and came here alone. Here's Travis. And when I first started photographing his family, this is probably the same year, this is when people told me there was a part of Galesburg not to go to, and it was this dangerous area. But it's this tiny town. You could pick it up and carry it around in your pocket. But I was instructed, don't go down there. So of course I was there immediately. And what Travis's life, this is Travis at 18, his whole story is kind of, there's a whole family surrounding Travis, and my cousin, well, I'll explain. I know I can't tell all the stories, but the pictures tell a lot. This is Travis's house in the mid-2000s. Travis wrestling Dalton. And you can see the railroad in the background. Those are tanker cars. And Travis's neighbors. That's Nevaeh in the front. I don't know what's happened to her. She'd be a grown woman now. Becca, Autumn, and Destiny, and their mom, back when their mom was in their life still. That's Destiny on Labor Day, and the trailer door. that's Pam, when Pam was a teenager. And Pam much older with her 2 kids, Cheyenne and Dalton. And here's Pam even much older now with Becca and Autumn and Destiny grown up and going to, this is the first day of school. Here they are even older in the driveway. My cousin is, well, I call her my twin cousin because we're almost the same birthday and we're kind of like siblings that way. We're very, very close. But she married into Travis's extended family. And so that begat this caption about my cousin's husband's brother's cousin's cousins, which is who they are. But I had been photographing Travis's family for at least 10 years before that wedding happened. And then we became sort of joined in this way. And it just seemed like, of course, you know, we're now connected. But that story has gone on and we've remained very close. This is just outside of town. This is the blind cat, Crystal and Barchetta. There's Cheyenne. That's one of the last times we saw her dad. This is a Galesburg tattoo, the name of the town, Galesburg. And here's Cheyenne growing up. Pam, who you met just a little while ago, Pam grows up and marries Dan, and then they adopt his 2 children, and then they adopt Becca and Autumn and Destiny and raise them. We're jumping around in time. But then the whole story, they end up with 5 kids. And with 5 kids, you have to have a really big house because of the DCFS rules and everything. So they got, I think, a 6-bedroom house. This is it, a giant Midwestern house where they still are. And here's Amber. We're jumping back here. This is the 90s. This is 97, I think. Amber in her step-granddaddy's trailer behind the house. And her friend Crystal. Crystal and Amber appear in my work in lots of different ways.
How old is she?
So this is Crystal that's actually the title of this work. This is Crystal at 18, and this is even before that. So Amber here is probably 15, I'm guessing.
And she had a cigarette. He looks like he's 12 years old.
Yeah. Everybody smokes, 12 years old or not. It's a smoking town. This is Amber, the pregnancy test. This was also a New York Times Sunday Magazine thing where you make the work and then they interview the people who are in the artwork. It used to be this project that they would do. And this is actually the pregnancy test here in his hand. So yeah, it was positive. I happened to come over right when they were taking the test. I didn't know. So, and then this is, and that's Mercedes, and this is in the backyard. This is Amber, is pregnant with her second baby here. And it says here, Mercedes will soon have a half-sister named Lexus. And here's Mercedes, and there's Crystal. And Crystal says, I'm that baby's father. And that's Jaden, also known as Jaden Lexus, or JJ. And this is around the time that we had a baby, as I recall. So this has got to be, 06, maybe. Yeah, about that. Amber and her girls are living in her car. The state took custody of the girls. This is double-blind visitation, where you don't know where they live and they don't know where you live, and then you meet at this neutral location, which is surprisingly mostly not funded by the government. They don't even do it, but there'll be private funding just so you can visit the kids, which we used to go do. Amber got her girls back, and now they live in the abandoned restaurant. This is moving out, and they're much older here. And I don't know, speaking of digital photography, I've worked and worked to try to get this legitimate, but these are fingers, and there's a shadow, so her sister's holding up the backdrop. My screen, you can really see it. And here's Amber. Amber and her brother. Amber and her first 3 children. And this is at Amber's cousin's house. So let's look at some video, because as the work's been growing, I used to have I had a 25-year rule against making video, because I felt like it was somehow not going to be sincere, and I never would do it, and then it became just free, you know, with your phone and everything, and I thought I can't not do it, and the stories were happening so quickly that I couldn't stop myself from recording, and so I began to accumulate video for several years without really watching any of it. But when I would go to make the work that you see me make, I just kept doing it, you know. And so then eventually in about 14, I realized I had to do something with it and I had to work with it. And so I started to make short videos that would accompany the photographs.
It was going on. Everybody knew about, supposedly, you know, the downfall of the crash of '08. Everybody knew about it. It was on the news. You couldn't not know about it, you know, not know about it. And, you know, seeing everything, you know, Galesburg hit early, but the effect kept going down till it hit bottom in '08. You know, with first Maytag leaving, then it just pretty much hit bottom in '08. At that time in 2008, I was laid off from Allied Welding. I was planning for our wedding in 2009.
Yeah.
And then I lost my job. It was hard because we only had Eric's salary, and then we had to decide on wedding plans not to do as much as we were going to do. Yeah, we had to do a lot of cutbacks on the wedding and financial, you know, planning of the wedding, and I went to a lot cheaper wedding dress than I had planned on. Instead of spending $800, I got one for $400, and of course I did all the making of all the food and all the cake and the desserts. I did them all myself, and that saved a lot of money. I did my own flowers. I did everything for my wedding myself, and it saved us a ton of money in the end. We have 4 kids together, and we have full custody of his 2 little ones, and we've had them since they've been 2 and 5, and now they are 10 and 7.
And the other one, the other 2?
My son is 17, and my daughter is 15, and they are my world. All 4 of them are my world. They are the joy of my life. I do love taking care of them. I do like doing that part. I just want to get back to working part-time. He was laid off, and he found a job up in Aurora, and it was a good paying job, and we decided, since financially Galesburg was very much on a downside, that we would move to Aurora. We were up there 6 months. I decided to sell my house in Galesburg. It was our last load to take up to Aurora, and my husband called me, and I was like, "What are you doing at home?" And he said, "Well, gotta tell you, I got laid off today." And here I just sold my house and kind of had a meltdown because I just sold my house 2 days before. I knew God had a plan, but at the time I didn't see what his plan was. And we were coming up to where we were homeless because in Aurora, it's very, very, very pricey to live compared to Galesburg. So we decided to come back to the Galesburg area, and we ended up staying up at the campgrounds. We did have a fifth wheel, and we stayed there through the summer. And then my husband did some work in the summer up at the campgrounds, removing trees and brush. And at the time in October, he went to the doctor, and he was having some pain in his back. And we moved down here to Good Hope because he was going to work for a friend of ours. And he only did it 3 days because he couldn't do it because of his back. So we ended up in Good Hope. And we've been at Good Hope since, I guess it'd be 2012. We've been here a year and a half. Now we're going to pick up, and we're getting our own house in another month. I'm so looking forward to them moving. I want my own place again. Moving is very stressful on everyone. Kids, relationships is very, very stressful. And I'm glad that I see the light showing through since about 3 years that we've had to move. This will be our 5th move.
So I want to talk about some stuff about this work and get into some questions. There's been this town of Galesburg is about 30,000 people, and my grandmother wrote in her autobiography, this is 20 years ago, that she felt like things started to go badly in the town when we stopped making things by hand. And she talks about this in her writing, and she talks about how things used to be made by hand, and as we lost that, then things started to fall apart, and she gets into kind of a philosophy about it. But I don't really know how it comes to be, but it seems like Galesburg, this town, keeps coming up in the news, and it was just in the news again. So I thought we should look at it. This is the Person of the Year story. And it talks about President Barack Obama back in 2005 delivering a commencement address at the tiny college, Knox College in Galesburg. Obama's hymn to the forgotten was his ticket to the White House. You know what the new challenge is, you've seen it. The fact when you drive by the old Maytag plant around lunchtime, no one walks out anymore. It's as if someone changed the rules in the middle of the game and no one bothered to tell these folks. And what's been going on in Galesburg for at least 12 years or so is a total loss of kind of any spirit. When there's no money to be made, people are then driving 2 hours to go to some job somewhere else, and places has been, people talk about it being like a ghost town and so on. But things are not so simple as to just analyze it that way. There's been other Obama speeches. The workers I met in Galesburg, Illinois, who were losing their union jobs at the Maytag plant that's moving to Mexico, and now they're having to compete with their own children for jobs that pay $7 an hour. And that's quite true. It's absolutely true. I'm watching it happen. I've been watching it happen. As a documentary photographer, I didn't plan on documenting that, but my cousin and her husband both lost their jobs on the same day. And this is before you just heard about, this is the later job losing that you see in the video, but this is the old loss of the Maytag's job. So things have been messed up for a long time, but the answer is not the new president that's supposedly going to be fixing things. That's not the answer. But there is a tremendous problem in the country. And it's beyond repair, in my opinion. I think now, what's mostly on my mind now is not some kind of scheme where suddenly we're going to come up with a plan to fix people. I think that we're in dire straits. So one of the things that I want to talk to you all about is what do we all do as citizens of the world? What will we do tomorrow and next? And what are we going to do if things go just about as badly as they look like they're going to go for all of us? So I want to talk about that a little bit, and I certainly want to ask you guys some questions. But the thing is that my cousin Candy is certainly not a Trump voter, and it doesn't really matter about knowing who was or who wasn't and so on in terms of analyzing things. things are bad and poor, and people are moving into each other's basements and consolidating their life, and that's been going on for 12 years or so. Things were bad before this. Things were bad before this. But now, what's coming now is something much, much beyond something about not being able to get a job or get work. That's not even going to be the problem now. The problem is going to be things that I've been thinking about. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about activism and what I think maybe we all might be wanting to think about. But what's been on my mind is what is sort of the worst scenarios of what may happen, like knocking on doors in apartment complexes and asking people for their identification, sending out teams of people to go around and go door to door and ask people whether they're citizens or not, going in masses around and knocking on the doors and asking people to prove that they belong here, and looking for this fictional idea of somehow that you're going to separate who's here and who's not here. That kind of an idea of government, it could be coming, and there's worse stuff. But I think that right now everybody's a little bit in shock and doesn't really know what the right action is. Should we go to a protest next week, or should I go to this other big protest next month, or should I be marching for this, or what should I be doing? And I think it's okay to not really know what to do right now. I think it's important to be reading, and I think it's really important to be talking to each other, like literally in your face, eye to eye, and talk to people. I talk to people on the Staten Island Ferry a lot, and I think it's really important that we communicate with each other directly, because if things go as badly as they may, we're all going to be living in a bad neighborhood, and it's not an inviting prospect at all. And I think everybody's at a different place with it, and some people maybe think that I'm really going too off the handle to start talk about things like asking people for their papers and knocking on doors and locking people up in camps in order to make sure that they don't do any harm. But we have lots of precedents for things like happening like that, and it could happen again. And I hope a lot of you know about Ansel Adams and the Manzanar, California. And if you don't, look it up. I'm not going to lecture you, but I do lecture my young 18 and 19-year-old students all the time, and we talk about social issues and photography and where it all belongs and what's in the news and so forth. So, but I think that finding Galesburg in the middle of the Person of the Year story was something shocking to me, and I thought, oh my God, here it is again, you know, and it's being used as kind of a pawn. And it's too bad to be looking at people like my cousin and thinking that because this has happened to her, that now there should be this change of power and we should put Exxon in charge of the world. And so it's frightening times, but we also can support each other. And I think a lot of people are looking around for wondering, well, what should I do? In other words, what's the right course of action to do? And so I've been thinking a lot about activism and I'm thinking about long-term stuff. So I want to put this out there while we still have time, and I certainly want to take questions, but this is a document of all of these different categories of long-term activism, because I think people need to now think about, what could I do, what would I want to do even a year from now that might be helping the world? Is my issue the environment? Is it civil rights? Is it arts activism? Is it gentrification, the environment? Should I be looking at mass incarceration and police brutality? Should I be working with Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ stuff? I think actually it's not really about what protest you go to tomorrow. It's about things that you might get started on and stick with, and something you might want to even be excited to go do next month, and something I think we all need to start thinking about how we might get involved in something that does good stuff, women's rights, diversity in government. So my wife's been working on this document and sharing it with people, taking it to shows, and she's an activist too. And so this isn't really for you to study now, but it's free and you can check it out. It's on my Twitter and so on. But there's lots of places to look for what to do. But I find that right now we don't really have really leaders. I think that we're kind of in charge of figuring out what we're going to do with our time. And I think it's real important that we keep talking and communicate with each other and think about, so I find it very encouraging to think about my grandmother and her life and all that, but I think that talking together is real important right now, maybe more important than ever, and I think that just trolling through hundreds of things on the internet, and that's not the right word, but dealing with just scrolling through page after page of news and news and news and news and news doesn't seem, I'm thinking that we really have to think in a big, long, this is going to be a long time together figuring out what happens, but I don't think it's going to be good. And I've seen people really struggling in this town for a long time. So now if things are going to become much worse, and Social Security might end, and maybe there's no health insurance for this whole town, you know, a ton of people are on Obamacare, a ton of them, everybody. If it doesn't exist anymore, what's going to happen? Close the mental hospitals and move out Rosie and Dorothy, and you know, they survived, you know. But what'll happen with the next group, you know, and the next group, and people who need serious care, and it's just not going to be there. So I'm thinking about all this stuff, and it's overwhelming. But I think there's enormous hope, and it's all of us looking at each other right here. So that's the end of my presentation, and I'd love to talk to you guys about all sorts of things. But I really want to thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And,
I have a mic. Please use it if you want to ask a question. It's for the video. It won't make your voice louder. Don't be surprised, but it's important. Yes.
Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for sharing your work and really your life with us. And I guess to that point, maybe it's a different answer for you than for other artists, but how do you know when the project is finished or at a point when you're ready to present it?
That's a good question. How to know when it's finished. I have been taking the same pictures on the same corners over and over in the same places, and I end up with an enormous amount of stuff that doesn't have any use, you know, because it's repetitive or it's accumulates and accumulates. And but I've had kind of some sort of spiritual guide that keeps telling me where to be with the work, and I just look for some kind of sign that tells me what belongs next and what belongs next. And I think that's how I broke into doing the video, because I felt like I couldn't continue to tell the stories enough with my handwriting and breaking it down into simple words, and it just started to get more complex. And that's why you're listening to Crystal talking about what she thinks she should do and what's important to her, and so listening. So now I think I'm at a point where instead of anything ending, it's like starting again, you know, that it's becoming this kind of storytelling thing where the story is telling itself. And so I think for me, the new thing to really crack is how to work with it as cinema and photography at the same time, and but also audience testing stuff, you know, running it past people and getting feedback about it. That's kind of like road testing stuff, and being really, really honest with yourself, and then trying to put whatever work you're doing in front of several people, some who are qualified and know all about it and some who aren't, and then really paying attention to that feedback and kind of testing it again. And this is for still photography or video or anything. I think that's really the method, you know, is trying it out. I think even the first picture with back here, that once I started to show this to people, and they were like, "That's really good, Chris." And I thought, well, it's just supposed to be a Christmas present, but I'm 18 or something, and so I need other people's perspectives, and I didn't have that as a meta idea at the time, but now it is. So I think road testing stuff, audience testing, is kind of the way I know what to do. I mean, if I had to make a method besides the spiritual inspiration, it's sort of a hard test, you know. So in the back, there's a question.
Great work to share. I feel like we've gotten a strong sense of your family and your background in Galesburg and the issues there. You live in New York now, and I'm interested to know what that's like for you, and if you continue to photograph locally in a way that's complementary or even different from what you've done before.
You know, I just don't think I can tackle New York. I love it, and I live here, But when I'm inspired to make work, I just want to go back to Illinois. You know, it's kind of like anything I do here has been a completely different subject altogether. You know, I work with a lot of students who work with New York as a subject, and I don't think it's my subject. I love it, but it's hard for me to even take pictures at a birthday party or something because I just want to be there, and I'm such a photographer the rest of the time. So I have, but living here gives me this kind of insider perspective because I travel from here to there and there to here all the time, and year round I'm going, and so. But I think when all the other work that I make is a total fantasy kind of thing. It's a totally different kind of, that uses some New York. There's some New York in that, but nothing about documenting the families here or the culture here. And I don't think I could, maybe someday, but I haven't felt inspired to do that. Sometimes I get asked, I think one time a museum asked me, they didn't ask me until I got all the way to the museum in the room, and they were like, would you do a documentary on this other town for us? And I had to turn them down because I never even been to that town. It wasn't my town, you know, so I couldn't. I think it's so far nothing has pointed me away from here. So and as a balance, I make different kinds of work, you know, that break out of this method. So, but thanks for the question. I think that's an important distinction.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm so blown away, really, by the just how personal everything, the whole body of work is. And I'm curious, your family and cousins and other subjects in this project, have they reacted differently over the years from when you were younger and just starting it, and then after you started getting recognition by things like the New York Times and galleries, and in terms of what their interaction with you was when it came to the photos?
That's a good question, and I think it's been in waves where I was always, when I got a book offer from Twin Palms, so this is like, 18 years ago or something when that first book was coming together. I thought that for sure that if I did the book that would be the end of it, that the book would be good, but then the work wouldn't be able to be made anymore, that somehow everyone would think, oh, well, that's what you were doing, was making this book, and we don't like it or something. And I thought, and I was really weighed the opportunity between thinking that maybe I shouldn't even publicize the work because I loved it and it was what I wanted to do. But I went around to everybody and showed them all the pictures, and everybody was happy with it, and even the difficult stuff and divorce stuff all seemed to be okay. So it's old news to everybody here before you guys see it. So I think there's kind of a cycle of the work, but then there was another book in 2010, and I didn't have the same kind of fears because Candy wanted it to be called Candy's Divorce, and it was all this stuff, So there's people who aren't in the work because I can tell 3 years and a mile away that they don't want to be involved, and so I never ask, and I never even am carrying the camera anywhere near those people because I don't want them to even remotely feel uncomfortable or think, here comes Chris, he's going to take my picture. If I think that that's coming, I won't even be on their side of town ever, because I just really work with people who are drawn to the work. And I think like working with Dorothy and Rosie in the nursing home and stuff, that people who just love it and who want more pictures and want to be in it, that's who I work with. And so there's no convincing anybody, it's just kind of, and even there's people where I have pictures, but I haven't really fully addressed it, and then maybe another year goes by and then we get into it or something. So there's a lot of waiting for the work to mature, or waiting until someone's truly comfortable with it, or waiting till I have somebody's parents' permission or something. I'll wait as long as it takes. So, but there's been waves of anxiety of thinking, oh, this is it now, it's going to be too big or something. But it's never really been too big. I think I know that Candy and Craig got some teasing when they were on the local newspaper. It had already been in art forum with a spread and stuff. It didn't matter. But the local newspaper did a thing with a big Candy's wedding and all that, and that was when Maytag was still running. But it was no big deal, you know. So I think largely because of they're glad that I've been able to do it and that it's been my job and stuff. And I think that that's been kind of that, you know, I have a family and able to get by, and that's been sort of the positive thing. And so, but that's a good question. It is part of, especially of all of us as being image makers and so on, how do you reckon with who you're taking pictures of and what do they think about it, you know? And it's fascinating what art history is doing, and looking at people that are still alive that are in Arbus work, or looking at people who are in various, you know, in Robert Frank's work and so on. It's very interesting to see it. But a lot of that work's made in a totally different context than this too, you know, and random passing on the street kind of work. And I've never really done that. So, more to say?
Just 1 second. Yeah, I did have one question that I want to ask before I lose the opportunity to ask it, which was a very minor point in your presentation about Walmart being dead against the Renaissance Fair.
Oh yeah, that
What was
sucks.
that all about?
I haven't been able to figure out how to make that into the art, but I'm working on a movie about Heidi now, because now there's Heidi's wedding. That's Candy's sister. So where are they? Are they here? No. But yeah, so now Heidi's gotten married, and it's awesome. And then there's a Heidi's wedding, and there's a Heidi's wedding picture, and so on. And she's still working at Walmart. And so I'm hoping that she'll address that. I talk about it because I'm still mad from 10 years ago about Walmart blocking out the Ren Fair dates because they knew that their employees wanted to go, and they didn't want to risk being slightly understaffed or having to scramble, so they just made it impossible. That's what I'm talking about. But it's not yet in the art. You know, I could write it on here, but that's not really, it has to kind of come from her. So we'll see if that really comes to fruition. But Walmart's the biggest employee in town now, you know. They have one of those super Walmarts. Question up front?
I was wondering what you and your relatives feel would be some way out. When I was reading the summer White Trash by Nancy, I think it's Princenthal, she was suggesting that the institutions that are centuries old in this country are so stacked against the dispossessed that it really doesn't matter whether the latest demagogue, such as Trump, will go down in flames or prevail or whatever. That what do you and your relatives feel would be a significant institutional change that would make their lives better? Do they think it's just going to be another factory in the neighborhood that gives them a good job?
Yes, they think it's going to be another factory. Not to cut you off at all, but I mean, that's exactly what a lot of people think. They think that if a factory could open, it would be like old times, because factories pay great money. A lot, and you could flex around your hours. And you know, Candy, when they got fired, Candy and Craig they had their shifts worked out, where I did this shift and you did that shift, and that meant you could pick up the kids and then I could have the kids, and then we would go to the factory and we would make the refrigerators, and it was great to them, and it was good money. Now the money is shit. It is $7 an hour. They really are competing with their own children for jobs, you know, so. But what you're saying about, and I haven't read that book, what you're saying about that the institutions have been stacked against the working class for a long time, that's absolutely true. That's why I point out, you know, here's this Person of the Year story about the unmentionable, he shall not be named guy, but it was bad before that. That's the thing, it was already bad. And you know, they were kicking the people out of the nursing homes in the 80s, and the mental hospitals fell apart in the 80s, and now it's 2016. So institutionally, it's been a disaster for a long time. I don't know where the bright ideas are. I do think that we all, as thinking people, should try to embrace some institutions like the ACLU. So I think that we need to embrace Planned Parenthood and some existing solid parts of the United States that can make change. But I don't know what's going to happen to you know, if every if every part of the governmental direction is been corrupt for a long time and has been unable to help very many people for a long time, I don't know. But I do think that the idea around here is that there'd be another factory. You know, I know the mayor was also the photography counter guy for years, and we would go to the photo store and he and I would talk, and he finally agreed not to really be mayor, and even though he always won, he finally agreed not to be mayor in I think the end of the Bush administration, because things were getting really bad. It was like '04, and there was this Republican businessman guy who was like, I'm going to be mayor, and so he sort of let him win the election. And he said, because I'm going to come in, I'm going to be the mayor, and I'm going to bring in a UPS jobs thing. And it fucking didn't bring it in. They let him be the mayor, and he came in and made all this noise and brought other Republicans up and changed the local politics, and they never brought one fucking thing in there. There was no UPS jobs, nothing. He just probably had a friend in UPS or something. And so, and now that's all old news, you know. I haven't paid attention in a while to what else will happen in that town, but I'm sorry, I'm cursing. But so, yeah, I don't know. That's a very good question, and perhaps a place to start thinking what will happen.
So these photos from 10 years ago or something like that? Is that
Well,
right?
30 years, so we're jumping around in time.
Yeah.
This is 2006 right
Okay,
here.
so that's 10 years ago. So it's still economically depressed.
It's kind of getting better.
They seem to have improved, because you said she moved into a house.
It's
like-
kind of getting better in Galesburg a little bit. Yeah, I would say that that there's been in very recent years, there's just been kind of a little bit more not industry, but there's been a few more jobs, and it feels a little better there. I have some friends who have downtown shops that have been doing better. There's been a little bit more, better.
Is that something you're planning to capture, you know,
I hope so.
in your work?
You know, I hope so. The economic recovery during Obama did kind of hold steady. You know, it didn't really get worse. People talked about a ghost town, but it didn't become a ghost town, you know. But when you go to like a fast food place, the employees are the smartest, best people from the high school or the cosmetology college or something. They're the people, like, there's so many people that want those jobs. We could watch another video about Amber applying to work at McDonald's, but those places are just run unbelievably. You go in and the service is astounding because they've got the best possible employees, you know? So yeah, there's a lot of nursing home jobs, like, well, not, you know, like medical industry jobs. There's another hospital that's happening in Galesburg now that's been employing people. There's a little bit with this small airport that's there. So it's been a little better. And then also a lot of people are driving to Peoria and working there, but then like coming back to Galesburg. So there's kind of, the Caterpillar is still in business. And so like Steve still drives to Caterpillar and comes back, Steve from Pictures. So if, I don't want to, did you have more to the
No, I was just
question?
going to say, it was interesting to see that fusion of optimism, how that would take form in your work. You know,
Yeah,
that'd be interesting to see that, how you would actually, you know, realize that.
Yeah, I hope so. It takes me a long time to get one good new picture, but the videos come quickly, so maybe the optimism will be reflected in more filming. You know, maybe so. Hope so. I try to look for joy too. You know, there's gloom and doom, as my grandma would say, but I'm definitely looking for joy, for sure.
An extension of the question that Kent had for you, I'm really curious. You've moved to New York and you've made such a brilliant career in the arts. Do people back home reach out to you for guidance, or has your role within the community kind of moved in that direction?
I'm working on a cool thing actually about that. Is that your question? I didn't want to cut you off. I don't know how much time we have. I'm going to do a show now with the Galesburg Civic Center, which is the size of this room, but it's the downtown Civic Arts Center, and we have it, and it's pretty well appointed, and we're going to do a big exhibit. And I've shown there before, but this is kind of bigger. That was like a group show, and this is going to be a whole show. And I've written several grants, and I never get it, but I've written grants to try to do something with the at-risk youth in the town, where we would do an exhibit and then do some kind of field trip. And I've tried to write Lang Taylor Prize a couple times and Guggenheim and stuff. Eventually it'll happen, but the Civic Center thing is happening, and it's marginally funded, but it's sort of to try to get people in the town to get involved in the arts as something that could be uplifting. So I've tried that, and it's coming again. And they have this kind of one artist residency thing that they do too, which I did in the 90s. But there is the possibility of and there's music in town too. You know, bands come and play there sometimes, blues bands and stuff, and that's pretty uplifting. And so I think that I try to do whatever I can. I used to do something every summer called Pictures of Galesburg, which was like local photographers who did things about the town, and we used to do that most summers during the Railroad Festival. That kind of still happens, and I know every artist in town, and we're all friends, and so we try to use that as that's a good tool to do positive things for people, I think, yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you about your, obviously all the work is about the subject matter and it's very personal but I just wanted to very briefly ask you about a few technical things because...
Yeah, well, it's partly a technical program here. I thought we should talk about. I tried to mention it a little bit, but
well,
yeah,
it's
what
just
do you got?
so a lot of the early work, you shot all square format and you wrote on the image, and I noticed here there was some variety in that, and I also wanted you to just refer to your lighting and maybe your color and the way you think about those things.
Yeah, so generally, depending on the exhibition of the work, I'll either have handwriting, a lot of it, or a little bit of it, or in some cases not. With the internet, I've done a lot less with the handwriting because the work tends to look better on screen when you're not trying to make room for the handwriting. But it's okay, but it creates this whole, it's a tricky thing. And then also, the way I do the handwriting is with a big real C print, and then I have this oil paint, and I do it permanently on there, and it's unerasable, and then it's there like an addition thing with original thing. But then to create that for the internet, it has to be done in this fake way where I have to like write it on a piece of paper and scan it and then put it in and mask it out, and because that's the only way to recreate it. So then that's not really the thing. So I'm still in a quandary about what's the right way to do it. But they certainly sometimes need their caption, So that I go back and forth about it, But to me, it doesn't matter whether it's if it's got a strong story, it's a strong story, whether it's fully represented with the text or not. So it's in batches, There'll be a batch with text and maybe a batch without. Or in the book, there's a few pages where it doesn't need text and it moves on. So there's been a couple of exhibitions that the text was on the side instead of on the print, but now it's back on the prints. The new portfolio is on the prints again, but tidier. So that's that part, but that's how it's done with the oil and so on. But I started doing this because I wanted the caption to be unremovable from the picture, like when you watch cinema, where you're in the world of the movie, and what just happened plays on the thing that's going to happen, and you can't separate them out from each other. And that was the idea, was to make the title of the piece unremovable, and kind of more true, because it's a document. So it's sort of like you can't look at it without knowing he's the new boyfriend. I mean, you could look at it without that, and it should work without the caption. It should still be a strong image, but the idea that they were irreversibly bonded, that's how that came about. And in terms of technically speaking, I'm still working with a Hasselblad and a couple lenses and shooting film as I always had, I think now there's almost no choice for film. I used to use Kodak's kind of wedding positive film, and Fuji Reala was good. Maybe they're still making Reala, but I would always just use whatever was the super color, the vivid color. I think it's VC now that they still make, not the NC, the normal color or neutral color, because I wanted, if there was going to be a juicier color film, wouldn't you want that? So that's what I would get, and then it's now become with C prints that you can't really get the blacks the way they used to be. So I really don't do any darkroom printing except for practice or contact sheets or something, because the new papers are being made such that the D-Max isn't what it used to be. It's changed because everybody pumps it all in through the files. So I can't print like I used to. I used to be a master printer and everything and go in with this giant 40 thing on the floor and, you know, dodge here and burn. And I did that for years, and I thought that would be a great job for me, but then they stopped making it, sort of, you know. So now we scan the film, but I still make the film the same way. I feel like as a documentary artist, I don't want to change any rules if I don't have to. So I try to keep, everything keeps being the same if at all possible, you know. So same camera and film, and then I'm pretty much always use the same flash, which is a Sunpack 600 series. And those are good because you can bounce it, or you can shoot it, or you can lay it down on the floor and it'll still light the room, or you can do any old thing with it, and they're just kind of indestructible. That's a big flash picture, you know, and that's a big, this is early on-camera flash when I actually wasn't even sure what was going on with it, and it would just go off, and that was a picture. And this is a bounced flash, and this is probably an off-camera flash, and that's daylight flash, one of my favorite ways to go. That's probably bounced off the ceiling of the porch at the nursing home. That doesn't look like the best exposure. That's the way it should look. But this is probably just direct flash, you know, wide open, nothing much. My favorite flash photographer is Larry Fink. That's the guy. If you guys know his work, he's amazing. And this is daylight flash, and there's some motion, which I've found with working with digital cameras that if you're going to have this tiny edge of motion, digital doesn't, maybe the new files are looking good that way, but I found that film has a way of doing that is not reproducible. So I'm no enemy of digital. I use it for other stuff. I think it's all fine. I think we should do it. I finally got a 35mm camera that I think does a great job, and I'm happy with that. But I wouldn't use it here because that's one of the rules, because it's documentary, so I'm not going to switch. But I have this feeling that I'll do this another 10 years and you won't, no more film or something won't be available anymore, and I keep thinking I'm going to be walking around with the same thing, only with this immediate preview. But I don't like the immediate preview because none of this work was made with an immediate preview. I didn't know if I had this picture or didn't have it. So why change that? So I make my students cover up the back and they can't see their preview, you know. So why would you need a preview? You should know. It should be there. You should know that Max is properly lit, and you bounce the light off the ceiling, and you know, this is a little bit underexposed, and if I'd had a preview, maybe I would have shot another one, but maybe I wouldn't have taken the good picture, you know. And this is I probably could go in, this could probably look better, but there's a stopping point, like I said, where I won't cheat anymore. I'm sure we could bring this stuff in, especially if I rescan this, because this I probably scanned on an Imicon 10 years ago, and now the new drum scans are glorious, and this negative could probably get another stop out of that thing. But then you start to wonder about those rules. I didn't even want to start doing this, but a friend of mine damaged one of the negatives, and all of a sudden I was like, this is the only, now it's digital, I have to fix it, it's the only way. And so that was like 04 or something, ended up stuck in the new format. So.
Chris, thank you so much. Everybody have a great holiday. We'll see you next year. Thanks.
All right, thanks y'all.